Good morning. I hope you're all enjoying your workshop. I am Clare Mathias and I chair a family foundation called the Hummingbird Trust. And we have co-sponsored the DASRA report, which you're learning about today. The reason we set up the Hummingbird Trust, which was in January 2007, was to provide a more formal vehicle for our family's philanthropic interests. It was a long and quite an important process because I am the mother of 3 half-Indian teenage daughters, and it emerged through our very early discussions from the girls that to be trafficked must be one of the world's most abhorrent crimes. So we wanted to work to reduce the vulnerability of young women and children to being trafficked. It was important as a trust, not just that we chose an area in which we wanted to fund, but that we learned a lot about it and involved the junior trustees, our teenage daughters, as much as possible. We chose Calcutta as a geographic centre point because my husband Chris, who's Indian, had been to school there for many years. And it's also one of the key trafficking hubs in India. We then undertook, as a family, to learn more about the various aspects of the trafficking cycle. The reason it happens, the stakeholders, potential interventions, what are the challenges, what are the hindrances. This is an ongoing process, and it was very important for us to commission DASRA as part of making us become more strategic and impactful with our funding in the future. It's been an advantage to us to concentrate geographically because that means we can achieve greater impact, we believe, and we can get a real sense for what is happening on the ground and adapt to local changes and address challenges as they arise, because we need to work within the context of the country and the area that we're working within. We can also then actually have more impact in taking a holistic approach to tackling the social issues. So that's really the background, a very short version of the background of how Hummingbird came to be. We have funded in India for over 5 years now, in a fairly modest way, but quite a holistic, comprehensive way, we believe, covering grassroots work, basic human rights, capacity building, advocacy, and umbrella organisations working in this field, as well as some direct targeted projects. It's been a good experience, it's been a positive experience in general, but it's really key that funders know their subject, or else they don't know the questions to ask. And I think both funders and NGOs build and develop a relationship that is, in my view, as a philanthropist rather than just somebody who writes a check, an important piece of philanthropy that we can work together. And funders need, NGOs need to understand what their funder motivations are. It is also critical to visit projects in the field and to do the relevant due diligence and governance checks. Funders are always worried that their money is not being used effectively. That doesn't mean, though, that the money has just got to go to direct projects. I think it's important to realise for NGOs to be honest about their admin costs, their management costs, their development costs, so they can grow and be more impactful as well, not just about the money that goes to direct projects. And sometimes I feel that funders, the NGOs are a little reluctant to be quite so open about that. Strategic funders like Hummingbird like to know what doesn't work well as what does work well. Being fed only good news doesn't educate funders to give more wisely. Now that's obviously difficult for NGOs, as they obviously want to please, but it's frustrating for funders. If a funder is too rigid in their approach and too narrow-minded, that can hinder innovation and hinder brave interventions. So philanthropy is about developing relationships and partnerships, And it's through the learning and expanding knowledge of this issue that innovation can be encouraged. But to support that innovation, some traditional funders may find innovation risky. So again, that comes back to the point of NGOs understanding the risk and motivation profile of their potential funders. So that's about being more honest, NGOs, please. NGOs can also be very funding-led, which means they don't necessarily work on the wider critical issues. And I think that is, in the anti-sex trafficking field, I think that's a particular potential problem area, because funders like to rescue, I mean, this is my own personal opinion, but they like to rescue individuals and see that they can have a very direct impact. But for us, as you understand the wider issues with the trafficking sector, you understand that there are different, the cultural, economic and patriarchal practices, as well as the corruption and the pure profit-making ability and the lack of alternatives that young women and children have, are really also very, very important factors, but they're sometimes hard to label and they're sometimes hard to measure the impact of a funder's donation. So, yes, funding-led projects are obviously very, very key, but sometimes I think NGOs should be a little braver in saying, but if you look back at what's causing a symptom, how can we address that? So I'm asking you to be a little braver, maybe, with the right philanthropist. Some people won't want to do that. So again, it's about understanding who your funders are and hopefully having a range of funders who have different profiles. One area where I'm amazed and I'm actually very saddened is the lack of collaboration between NGOs working in the same sector. I think this is a real block to progress with the bigger issues. I know there are some, although I don't fully understand it, but I know there's some ideological differences sometimes, but I really encourage NGOs, and if this workshop can be a beginning for this, it is really critical to work together. It is only by joining up your areas of expertise, individual and jointly, that this issue will be cracked. And I am really saddened by what I see in that sector so far. So I ask you to start with a fresh slate with Dasra there. One other particular area that I've noticed is that it's difficult to get reliable data in this sector. And I know NGOs constantly struggle with pulling together information for funders, pulling together reports when they've got far more important things to be doing, and then don't necessarily see that as part of the use of funds. But data does speak, it is a worthwhile investment, and it really aids wider communication. It also shows where the gaps are. I mean, if you look at some of the figures in the books and reports about number of people trafficked, number of people rescued, there are some huge gaps which, without having that data, we don't know where to address the problems. Every NGO I've spoken to believes that what they do is absolutely the most right and most correct and most important aspect working in this sector. I'm sure that is completely correct, but please also be generous in your knowledge sharing about what other people do. So I think that's some of our experience of the funding in India to date, some of the challenges that I think there are. In terms of organizational criteria, in terms of how can you attract more funders, I've said before that it's about understanding the funder profile. I also would like NGOs to use their critical field knowledge to build a knowledge base that can be grown and shared. I think it's important that NGOs are very clear about their theory of change, and that they can articulate what they think that they are doing that will make a difference, and match that to the funders' own passions and beliefs. And again, I think it's important to try and have a portfolio of funders so that you do get the shared knowledge and thought and interesting conversations that bring out other issues. A funder should really have a developing relationship with an NGO. Now, if the donation is of sufficient size, and I know that's heretic to say that, but NGOs do need to work out how they prioritise the use of their time and the use of their funds. But again, be honest about it, because funders need to learn, and they need to learn that if they only give, £500 or how much that is in rupees, that doesn't buy a lot of time, and there are other priorities for NGOs. But that's a conversation when you have a relationship. And you may not always have a relationship with funders. Again, as I say, depends on their motivation. All aspects of good governance are important, but as I say, don't hide the costs. I personally like to see innovative approaches, and I like to see people challenging conventional thoughts, trying things differently, measuring what works. And that isn't free. That needs to be funded, as do well-remunerated staff and motivated staff. The other area I'd probably just finish on is working with government agencies. I think the time has come where the only really in the anti-sex trafficking area, the only really where you're going to get scalable interventions, and every intervention is important, every intervention is a life, but to really try and build on that knowledge so that in 10 years' time we're not still in the same position, is to work with the government agencies. And that must be incredibly frustrating, but I think it is something that, again, well-informed funders may, if you put together a good project spec, may be very interested to fund, because it actually addresses the issue more widely and probably more sustainably. So I think if I was to look to an NGO, I would like, having understood the relationship and the individual's passions and beliefs, to actually come to funders with a range of options to fund, whether, from easy to fund to harder to fund, to grassroots, to advocacy, to strategic, more strategic, less strategic, more direct, indirect. So that is all I have to say. I'm very happy to be involved in more conversations as and when that is possible. This is part of an ongoing process, and we're personally great supporters of DASRA, so we look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you.